You can call him governor or congressman or commissioner. Joe Brennan has held a lot of titles during his political career. Of course, here in Maine, most people just call him Joe. He grew up on this street, an Irish kid from Munjoy Hill, and it was his roots in this ethnic, hard-working neighborhood which formed what Joe Brennan likes to call his political faith.
My parents both came over from Ireland in the early part of the last century, and my father worked on the waterfront. I was one of 8 kids. I actually worked occasionally longshore, and I like to say I then found out about a law school up the street, and I enrolled in that, and I've never done a hard day's work since.
Joe Brennan began his political career shortly after finishing law school with a run for the legislature.
I really didn't think about running for office until I got out of law school. And then someone suggested I run for the legislature, and I had no great qualifications, but my name began with B. There were 24 candidates for 10 seats or 11 seats, so I was high in the alphabet, and that's why I was elected. But once I got up to the legislature and I started to meet people who were legislators whom I had read about before and even met governors, I said, I might be able to do that. And I think a guy named Jerry Talbot, actually the only African-American, I think, in the legislature at that time, urged me to run for governor.
Is that true? You think you got elected the first time because your name began with a B?
I think that is that, and it was an Irish name in the Democratic primary, and that helped you. But I had no great qualifications. I had, I'd been in the Army, I had graduated from Boston College, and I was a top student at the law school and things of that sort, but basically I had no political experience.
4 terms in the legislature gave Joe plenty of experience, and his next step was Attorney General.
That was a big job, and I had probably the biggest case that the state ever has seen. That's the Indian land claims, where some tribes were claiming title to about half the state of Maine. And many people were quite worried about the title to their land. Even a lot of liberals weren't so liberal, when they owned land in the claim area. It was a big case. I was in the paper every day on it, and it actually turned out well. I felt that the Maine citizens weren't responsible. If anybody had done any wrong, it was the federal government. And ultimately, it worked out that way. The federal government paid the Indians about $80 million.
The federal government owes a special responsibility to all the people of Maine, of course, Indian and non-Indian, to settle this claim. Worked all right?
Then it was on to the Blaine House as governor of Maine.
I had, again, no financial resources. I work in the Attorney General's office all day and work all night campaigning around the state every single weekend. A tremendous effort goes into it, particularly when you have no financial resources. I think I won the primary and the general election back then. Between the two, I don't think $500,000 was spent. Now you couldn't do anything like that. It was a big night, I was kind of saying from Munjoy Hill to the Blaine House, we're going to make the trip.
Joe not only made the trip that night, he stayed in the Blaine House for 8 years.
I think one of the best tests that I, as a Democrat, sought re-election. And when I sought re-election, I won all 16 counties. I don't know if any Democrat ever did that. I not only won all 16 counties, I don't want to brag, but I won Falmouth, Cape Elizabeth, Cumberland, Forsyth. Those people generally aren't in love with Joe Brennan and his political philosophy. I feel proud of the efforts we made in education, and we started all this testing, a lot of stuff that's being talked about now by President Bush. I'm very proud of things we did in regard to economic development. The Finance Authority of Maine has been behind or part of almost every economic expansion in this state. I'm really proud of things like the prison. I locked down the prison. Prisoners were being taken advantage of. The state was not in charge of its own prison when I took over the governorship. We put the state back in charge of its own prison, did it without a death or an injury. There are a lot of different things that we worked on that we have tremendous pride in. Environmentally, we set aside some of our rivers, so that they wouldn't be developed, so a lot of what's Maine would be preserved. I think anyone who has served as governor will agree the only better job is the presidency. It's kind of hard to get.
Well, Joe went to Washington as a member of Congress, but then he came home to run for governor again, this time against Jock McKernan.
I ran the best campaign that I'm capable of running, and as I said, I had the very best people. So no excuses. We did our very best, and I guess that's all any of us can do in life. Well, it's more fun to win than to lose. But you understand that when you get into it. I've been fortunate. I won the governorship twice, won by a huge margin, winning every county. I was elected district attorney. That was a big job. I was elected to the legislature 4 times and to the floor leader position 3 times. So I've had a lot more wins than losses. But I think when you go back again, I think the people might say, well, he had his chance. Let's try somebody new. And, you know, that's their right.
So what does this American politician of Irish descent think of politics today?
I think there are a lot of people in public life, without mentioning names, that probably don't do much of anything without the issue being focus grouped and polled. Yeah. And I think that's you know, when I first went into politics, you know, the issue was supporting organized labor, supporting the minimum wage, supporting job safety, supporting senior citizens, supporting anybody left behind. That was the Democratic fight, looking for social justice, economic justice. That fight isn't being made so much right now. You know, we're in a country where the CEOs of many of the major companies make 500 times as much in a week as the average worker in their company. That's a disgrace. That's not economic justice, it's not social justice, and nothing's being done about it.
And in the end, social justice is what Joe Brennan is all about. Today, Joe Brennan serves as a federal trade commissioner and still keeps a home on Munjoy Hill.